I watched my mother lean in and whisper to my best friend, a sweet, concerned smile plastered on her face. And in that moment, I had no idea she was trying to stage a quiet coup against my mental health. I'm 28 years old, and my mother still thinks she can play God with my brain chemistry. How do you handle a parent who would rather see you suffer in silence than admit that a little orange pill saved your life? By the time this day was over, a line was crossed that I don't think can ever be uncrossed, and I found myself standing on the edge of a choice that would either destroy my relationship with my family or destroy my own sanity. To understand why I was standing in a crowded beer garden, feeling like my skin was crawling, you have to understand where I was 5 years ago. 2019 was the year my world stopped spinning. It started with a heartbreak, the kind of soul-crushing, first love ending catastrophe that leaves you feeling like you've been hollowed out with a melon baller. I wasn't just sad, I was disappearing. I remember looking in the mirror and not recognizing the girl staring back. My collarbones were jutting out because I'd lost so much weight so fast. I would sleep for 14 hours and wake up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. The things I used to love, painting, hiking, even just grabbing a coffee, felt like chores I didn't have the energy to complete. When the doctor finally said the word depression, it felt like a heavy weight was lifted, even if the diagnosis itself was heavy. I was put on an antidepressant, and for the first time in months, the fog started to clear. But there was a catch. The medication I'm on is powerful. It's effective, but it's demanding. If I miss a single dose, the withdrawal symptoms hit like a freight train. Brain zaps that feel like tiny electric shocks in my skull. Nausea that keeps me curled on the bathroom floor. And a sense of vertigo that makes the room spin. It's not something you just stop doing. It's a lifeline, but it's one you have to manage with extreme care. My parents, however, didn't see it that way. Coming from a traditional Middle Eastern background, mental health isn't really a thing you treat with chemicals. To my mother, depression isn't a chemical imbalance. It's a lack of willpower, or worse, a physical ailment that can be cured with the right diet and enough prayer. She's 61, and she spent her whole life believing that if you can't see the wound, it doesn't exist. For the past several years, every single conversation we've had has felt like a slow-motion car crash. She'll look at me over dinner and say, "Are you still taking those pills? You look so tired. They're poisoning you." I stopped sharing my medical history with her years ago. I had to. It was the only way to protect my peace. She doesn't know the name of my medication. She doesn't know my dosage. I treat my medical records like a state secret because I know that any information I give her will be weaponized. But she's persistent. She's the kind of woman who treats Google like a medical degree and her intuition like a divine mandate. This past weekend started out so normally. My boyfriend and I decided to head to a local beer garden to meet up with our close friends Robin and Sam. It was one of those perfect American afternoons. Golden sunlight, the smell of pretzels and hops in the air, the low hum of 100 different conversations blending into a peaceful buzz. Robin is 30, Sam is 29, and they've been our rock for years. We were sitting there, clinking glasses, finally feeling like we could breathe after a long work week. But then, I saw them. My parents are members at this particular beer garden, and I saw my mom's familiar silhouette cutting through the crowd. My stomach did a slow, heavy roll. I love my mother, but her presence in public spaces always feels like a ticking clock. You never know when the alarm is going to go off. They joined our table, and for the first 15 minutes, things were civil. There were polite inquiries about work and the weather, but I could see my mom's eyes scanning me. She wasn't looking at my smile. She was looking for symptoms. Recently, I had some lab results come back that were slightly abnormal. Nothing life-threatening, just some levels that were a bit off. The kind of thing your doctor notes and says, "Let's keep an eye on this." Like a fool, I had mentioned it to her in a moment of weakness, thinking I could share a small part of my life with my mother. I should have known better. To her, those labs weren't a medical fluke. They were the smoking gun. In her mind, the antidepressants were finally destroying my body. She waited until we were momentarily separated from the group. She pulled me aside, her hand tight on my arm, and her voice dropped into that low, urgent tone she uses when she's about to dismantle my boundaries. "You need to stop," she whispered, her eyes burning with a terrifying kind of maternal certainty. I looked it up. Those labs? It's the medicine. It's eating you from the inside out. You're becoming a shell. I read a whole forum of people who said their liver failed because of these things. I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest. "Mom, you don't even know what I'm taking. You're not a doctor. My doctor is happy with my progress. Please, let it go." "I am your mother," she hissed. "I know your body better than any doctor. You're stubborn, and it's going to kill you. You need to get off them immediately. I won't watch you do this to yourself." I walked away. I had to. I felt the tears stinging my eyes, and I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down in public. I went back to the table, took a deep breath, and tried to rejoin the conversation with Robin and Sam. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd managed to shut it down. But my mother wasn't finished. She had a new strategy. If she couldn't convince me, she would recruit an army. As the afternoon wound down and we prepared to leave, I noticed my mom lingering near Robin. They were talking quietly, away from the rest of us. I didn't think much of it at the time. Robin is incredibly kind and patient, the kind of person who listens to everyone. I figured my mom was just bending her ear about some family gossip or a recipe. It wasn't until we had walked back to our cars and the parents were safely out of earshot that Robin turned to me. Her face was pale and she looked physically uncomfortable, shifting her weight from side to side. "Hey," she said, her voice hesitant. I really didn't know if I should tell you this, but your mom came up to me while you were at the bar." I felt a cold chill wash over me, despite the afternoon heat. "What happened?" Robin took a breath. "She basically cornered me. She started telling me how worried she is about your health, and then she actually asked me to start encouraging you to stop taking your medication. She told me I'm a good friend and that you'd listen to me. She made it sound like I'd be saving your life if I helped her talk you out of it." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The embarrassment hit me first, a wave of pure, hot shame that my mother had dragged my private medical struggles into my social circle. But right behind the shame was a fury so intense I could taste it. She hadn't just crossed the line. She had set the line on fire and danced on the ashes. She had gone behind my back to manipulate my best friend into being her proxy in a war against my own mental health. I stood there in the parking lot, looking at Robin's distressed face, and I realized that my mother wasn't just worried. She was dangerous. I stood there in the parking lot, the gravel crunching under my boots, and for a second, the sound of the distant music from the beer garden felt like it was miles away. All I could see was the look of sheer, awkward pity in Robin's eyes. That's the thing about humiliation. It's not just a feeling, it's a physical weight. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, a cold, heavy stone. I had spent years building a life for myself, a life where I was an adult, a professional, a woman who could manage her own brain and her own body. And in 5 minutes, with a few whispered sentences, my mother had reduced me to a helpless child in front of my closest friends. "I am so sorry, Robin," I stammered, my voice sounding thin and brittle even to my own ears. I didn't know. I didn't think she would ever." "It's okay," Robin said, reaching out to touch my arm, her expression softening. "I mean, it's not okay, but you don't have to apologize for her. I didn't know how to react. She was so intense about it. She kept saying that you were sick because of the medicine, and that since I'm your friend, I have a responsibility to save you. It was a lot." I could only imagine. Robin is the kind of person who avoids conflict at all costs. She's the peacemaker of our group. For my mother to corner her like that, to put the weight of my medical salvation on her shoulders, wasn't just an overstep. It was a tactical strike. My mother knew I had stopped listening to her. She knew my boyfriend was on my side. So she went for the one person she thought she could influence. She tried to build a cage out of the people I love. My boyfriend, who had been standing slightly off to the side, finally stepped in. He looked as livid as I felt. He's seen the bad days. He was the one who held my hand when the brain zaps from a missed dose made me feel like my head was being split open by a bolt of lightning. He's seen the version of me that couldn't get out of bed, and he's seen the version of me that the medication helped bring back to life. He knows the stakes. "We need to go," he said quietly, his hand finding the small of my back. The drive home was silent for a long time. The sunset was painting the sky in deep bruises of purple and orange, fitting for how I felt. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction from the afternoon. I thought about those abnormal labs. It was such a small thing, a slightly elevated level of something that my doctor had shrugged off as a result of a recent flu or maybe just stress. But to my mother, it was the holy grail of evidence. She had been waiting for years for a reason to point at my pills and say, "See, they're killing you." In a Middle Eastern household, health is a communal property. There's no such thing as my medical history. If you have a cough, the whole extended family knows by dinner. If you lose weight, it's a public forum topic. But mental health? That's the ultimate taboo. It's the skeleton in the closet that everyone pretends isn't there, even as the bones rattle against the door. To my mother, my depression wasn't a medical condition. It was a character flaw, or perhaps a spiritual failing. And the medication? That was the Western poison that was making me weak. I thought about the 2019 version of me. I remembered the way my ribs started to poke through my skin. I remembered the terrifying emptiness, like I was a room where all the furniture had been taken out and the lights had been turned off. That girl was dying. She was disappearing into the shadows of her own mind. The medication didn't just fix me, it gave me the floor back. It gave me a foundation so I could start building myself again. And my mother wanted to tear that foundation out from under me because of a Google search. "She has no idea," I finally whispered, staring out the passenger side window. "She has no idea what happens if I just stop. She thinks it's like stopping a vitamin. She doesn't understand the withdrawal. She doesn't understand that my brain literally needs this to function right now." "She doesn't want to understand," my boyfriend replied, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "Because if she understands it's a real medical issue, then she has to admit she can't control it. And your mom hates not being in control." He was right. That was the core of it. This wasn't about my liver or my lab results. This was about the fact that I had found a way to be okay that didn't involve her permission. It was about the fact that I was 28 and making decisions she didn't approve of. By going to Robin, she was trying to regain that control. She was trying to create a world where everyone I trusted was telling me the same thing she was. She wanted to gaslight me into health. By the time we got back to our apartment, the fury had settled into a cold, hard resolve. I felt violated. My medical privacy is one of the few boundaries I have left with her, and she had shattered it. She didn't just talk about me, she recruited for her cause. I sat on the edge of a bed, my head in my hands. I knew I couldn't let this go. If I didn't say something now, what would be next? Would she call my boss? Would she show up at my doctor's office? There is no limit to what a worried mother thinks she's entitled to do in the name of love. But this wasn't love. It was an obsession with her own narrative. I looked at my phone. There were no missed calls from her, no texts. She was probably sitting at home right now, feeling proud of herself. She probably thought she'd planted a seed in Robin's mind that would eventually bear fruit. She had no idea that Robin had immediately told me. She had no idea that her secret mission had just blown up the last bridge of trust I had for her. "I don't know how to talk to her," I told my boyfriend. "If I confront her, she'll play the martyr. She'll cry and say she's only doing it because she loves me and doesn't want to see me poisoned. If I don't confront her, she'll think she got away with it and she'll do it again. I'm trapped." I felt the familiar prickle of anxiety, the very thing I take my medication to help manage. My chest felt tight. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother's crusade to get me off my meds was the very thing making me need them more than ever. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, imagining the conversation. I could hear her voice in my head. I did it for your own good, Habibti. Why are you so angry? I am your mother. I have a right to worry. The word right always came up. She felt she had a right to my body, a right to my mind, a right to my secrets. But as the clock ticked toward 2 a.m., I realized something. Setting a boundary isn't about making the other person understand. My mother might never understand. She might never believe that depression is real or that the medication is necessary. Setting a boundary is about protecting myself, regardless of whether she agrees with the rules or not. I needed to decide what that boundary looked like. Was it low contact? Was it a total information blackout? Or was it finally, for the first time in 28 years, telling her exactly who I am and what I will no longer tolerate, even if it meant blowing things up, as she always phrased it? I thought about Robin's face again, the discomfort, the embarrassment. I wouldn't let her put my friends in that position ever again. This was my fight, and it was time I stopped hiding from it. The next morning, the sun crawled through the blinds of our bedroom, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like the continuation of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering a rhythmic, frantic beat against my ribs. It's a strange thing, living with depression and anxiety. You spend so much time and effort building a glass house of stability, and then someone you love comes along with a handful of stones and starts throwing them just to see if they can break something. My phone was sitting on the nightstand, silent. I knew the drill. My mother wouldn't call me first. She'd wait for me to reach out, to play the good daughter, to ask her how her morning was so she could slip in a comment about my pale skin or my tired eyes. She was a master of the slow burn, the kind of emotional manipulation that makes you feel like you're the one who's crazy for being upset. I rolled over and looked at my boyfriend, who was still asleep. I felt a surge of gratitude for him that almost brought me to tears. He'd seen the worst of it. He'd seen the nights in 2019 when I couldn't stop crying long enough to breathe, when the heartbreak of that first love had somehow cracked open a door to a darkness I didn't know lived inside me. He was there when I finally admitted I needed help, and he was there when the first few weeks of the medication made me feel like I was walking through molasses. Most importantly, he was there for the brain zaps. If you've never experienced them, it's hard to describe. It feels like a literal bolt of electricity firing off behind your eyes, a sudden zzz that makes the world tilt for a split second. It happens if I'm even a few hours late on a dose. It's my body's way of saying, hey, the chemistry is shifting and I don't like it. It's a physical reminder of how much my biology has changed, and it's terrifying to think about what would happen if I just listened to my mother and quit cold turkey. I'd be a wreck. I'd be hospitalized. But to her, those side effects are just more proof that the medicine is, quote, evil. She doesn't see them as a result of the body's dependency on a necessary chemical. She sees them as the medicine fighting me. I got out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, and walked to the kitchen to make coffee. As the machine hissed and groaned, I thought about the cultural weight of all this. In our community, there's this unspoken rule. You don't air your dirty laundry, and you definitely don't talk about madness. To my mother, my depression was a shame that needed to be hidden, and my medication was a crutch that proved I wasn't strong enough. She'd rather I be miserable and natural than happy and medicated. I thought about those lab results again. They were such a small, insignificant part of my life until she got a hold of them. I'd had a routine physical, and my white blood cell count was a tiny bit off. The kind of thing that happens when you're fighting a cold you don't even know you have. But when I'd mentioned it to her, her eyes had lit up. I saw the gears turning. I saw her finally finding the weapon she'd been looking for. It's the pills, Habibti, she'd said, her voice dripping with a fake honeyed concern. They're making your blood thin. They're making you weak. I read on the internet that these drugs cause organ failure. Why won't you listen to me? I am the one who gave you life. I know your blood better than any machine. She'd spent hours on Google, bypassing medical journals and peer-reviewed studies, to find the one obscure forum where someone's cousin's friend had a bad reaction to a completely different medication. And she'd decided that was my fate. It was a confirmation bias on steroids. She didn't want the truth. She wanted to be right. But going to Robin? That was the part that I couldn't get past. Robin has been my friend since college. She's the person I call when I'm having a panic attack at 2 a.m. She knows the struggle. She's seen the progress. For my mother to corner her at a beer garden, a place of joy and relaxation, and try to turn her into a spy? It felt like a violation of the highest order. My mother had effectively told Robin that I wasn't capable of making my own medical decisions. She'd painted me as a victim of my own delusions, and she'd asked Robin to join her intervention. The sheer audacity of it made my hands shake as I poured my coffee. I could imagine the scene so clearly. My mother, leaning in close, smelling of her expensive perfume and herbal tea, whispering to Robin with that concerned look that I've come to loathe. You love her, don't you, Robin? You want her to be healthy. You have to help me. She won't listen to her mother. She thinks she needs these poisons. But she trusts you. You have to tell her to stop, for her own sake. I felt sick. It was a betrayal of my autonomy. It was an attempt to isolate me, to make me feel like everyone around me was secretly judging my choices. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my phone. I had a text from Robin from a few minutes ago. Hey, just checking in on you. I'm still really bothered by what your mom said. I hope you're okay. Love you. I typed out a reply, my thumbs hovering over the screen. I'm so sorry again, Robin. I'm handling it. I won't let her put you in that position again. I promise. But how could I promise that? I didn't have a plan. I was 28 years old, and I was still afraid of my mother's explosions. In our house growing up, a confrontation didn't mean a calm discussion. It meant screaming. It meant crying. It meant being told I was a disrespectful daughter who was breaking her mother's heart. It meant weeks of the silent treatment, or worse, the weaponized guilt of her falling ill because of the stress I was causing her. I knew that if I called her and told her she'd crossed the line, she wouldn't apologize. She wouldn't say, "You're right, I shouldn't have talked to Robin." No, she would turn it around. She would say, "Oh, so now your friends are telling you secrets? Now you're turning your friends against me? I was only trying to save your life. If you want to die from those pills, fine. Don't come crying to me when your liver fails." It was a cycle I'd been in my entire life. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was the fact that I was finally feeling level, thanks to the very medication she hated. Maybe it was the look of genuine distress on Robin's face. Or maybe I was just tired. Tired of hiding my pill bottles when she came over. Tired of lying about how I was feeling. Tired of being a passenger in my own life. I looked at my boyfriend as he walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "You're still thinking about it," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. "I can't stop," I admitted. "If I don't say something, she wins. She thinks she has a right to my medical information and a right to my friends. But if I do say something, she's going to blow up the whole family. She'll tell my dad I'm being hysterical and ungrateful. She'll make herself the victim." "Let her," he said firmly, leaning against the counter. "Let her be the victim in her own head. You're the one living in your body. You're the one who has to deal with the brain zaps and the darkness if you stop. If she wants to blow things up because you asked for basic respect, then maybe the house needed to be cleared anyway." He was right. But the blowing up part was what terrified me. In a Middle Eastern family, the house isn't just you and your parents. It's the aunts, the uncles, the cousins. It's the reputation. If I disrespected my mother, it would ripple through the entire community. I would be the crazy daughter who chose Western chemicals over her mother's love. I took a long sip of my coffee, the heat scalding my throat. I needed to be smart. I needed a strategy. I couldn't just scream at her. I needed to set a boundary so thick and so high that even her Google research couldn't get over it. I decided I wasn't going to call her. Not yet. I was going to write it out. I needed to see the words. I needed to make sure I didn't back down when she started crying. I grabbed a notepad and a pen and started to write. Mom, we need to talk about what happened at the beer garden. The blank page of the notepad stared back at me, as white and unforgiving as my mother's expectations. How do you write a letter to a woman who views your boundaries as a personal declaration of war? I started with, "Dear Mom," but immediately crossed it out. Too formal. It felt like I was writing to a stranger, and while she often felt like one, the reality was much messier. I tried "Mom," but that felt too sharp, like a slap to the face. In my culture, you don't set boundaries with your parents. You endure. You absorb their criticism like a sponge absorbs water, and you carry the weight of their love until your back breaks. To speak up is to be ungrateful. To keep a secret is to be sneaky. To prioritize your own mental health over their comfort is the ultimate betrayal. I could hear the voices of a dozen aunts and cousins in my head, whispering about how lucky I was to have a mother who cared so much, who worried so deeply. She only wants what's best for you, Habibti. Why are you being so difficult? But what's best for me isn't a life spent in a catatonic state on a sofa, unable to brush my hair or eat a piece of toast. I looked at my boyfriend, who was washing his coffee mug at the sink. He's the complete opposite of my family dynamic. His parents are the kind of people who ask, "How can we support you?" and then actually listen to the answer. Watching him move through the world with such a clear sense of self-worth was a constant reminder of what I was missing. He didn't have to fight for the right to own his own brain. "I'm struggling with the wording," I admitted, throwing the pen down. "Everything I write sounds like I'm starting a fight, but I'm just trying to finish one she started." "Maybe you don't need a letter," he said, turning around. "Maybe you just need to tell her the truth. The raw, ugly truth. Tell her what those poisons actually do. Tell her what life looked like before them." I shivered. I didn't like thinking about 2019. It felt like a different lifetime, a black and white movie that I'd lived through but couldn't quite remember the plot of. I remember the weight loss, though. I'd gone from a healthy, curvy 23-year-old to a ghost. My clothes hung off me like I was a wire hanger. My mother had been worried then, too, but her worry was focused on my appearance. She'd bring me heavy stews and tell me I looked sickly. But when I told her I couldn't stop crying, she'd tell me to go for a walk or count my blessings. She'd seen me at my absolute lowest, and her solution was for me to just be better. When I finally went to a psychiatrist and got the prescription, I didn't tell her for months. I knew how she'd react. I'd hidden the bottles in my underwear drawer, taking the pills in secret like I was doing something illegal. When she finally found them during one of her deep cleans of my apartment, another boundary she routinely ignored, she'd acted like she'd found a bag of heroin. "What is this? You're a drug addict now? You need chemicals to be happy? What will people say if they find out my daughter is on crazy pills?" That was the day the war started, and it hadn't stopped for 5 years. I picked up the pen again. I needed to address the Robin situation first. That was the most egregious violation. "Mom, I am writing this because I am deeply hurt and embarrassed by what happened at the beer garden. Robin told me that you approached her and asked her to pressure me into stopping my medication. This is a massive breach of my trust and my privacy. My medical decisions are between me and my doctor. By dragging my friend into this, you didn't just disrespect me, you made her incredibly uncomfortable. I need you to understand that this is not okay. You cannot go behind my back to my friends." It felt okay. Strong, but okay. But then I thought about her reaction. She would focus on the fact that Robin tattled on her. She would see Robin as the enemy, the person who poisoned our relationship. She wouldn't see her own actions as the problem. She would see the reporting of her actions as the betrayal. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. My head was starting to ache, the precursor to a tension headache. I could feel the brain zaps hovering at the edges of my consciousness, a reminder that I'd been 10 minutes late with my dose this morning because I was so stressed. It's a cruel irony. The stress of her trying to get me off the meds makes the meds more necessary, while simultaneously making the side effects of any missed dose more prominent. I thought about the abnormal labs again. My mother had become a self-taught expert on my blood work. She'd spent hours on sketchy health blogs and natural healing forums, convincing herself that my antidepressants were causing my white blood cell count to fluctuate. She'd even suggested I start a juice cleanse to detox the chemicals out of my system. You know what's funny? I said to my boyfriend. She thinks she's being the hero. In her head, she's the brave mother fighting the big pharma monster to save her daughter. She doesn't see that she's the one causing the most damage. That's the hardest part to fight, he replied. You can't argue with someone who thinks their love gives them a license to be toxic. To her, there is no boundary, because she thinks you are an extension of her. If her arm was hurting, she'd fix it. Since she thinks you are hurting, she thinks she has the right to fix you her way. That was it. That was the core of the Middle Eastern parent-child dynamic. I wasn't an independent woman of 28. I was a limb that had gone rogue. I was a part of her body that was malfunctioning, and she was determined to prune me back into a shape she recognized. But I am not a limb. I am a person. I have a job, I have a partner, I have a home, and I have a brain that, right now, requires a specific chemical balance to keep the lights on. I looked at the notepad. I needed to add more. I needed to be clearer about the consequences. I have kept my medical history private from you for a long time because I knew you would react this way. I value our relationship, but I cannot have you interfering in my health. If you continue to bring this up, or if you ever approach my friends about this again, I will have no choice but to take a break from speaking with you. I need to protect my peace, and right now, your worry is the biggest source of stress in my life. The word stress felt like a grenade. She would hate that. She would say, I'm a source of stress? After all I did for you? After I carried you for 9 months and stayed up with you when you were a baby? The classic hits of the maternal guilt trip playlist. I felt the familiar urge to delete it all, to just call her, pretend everything was fine, and hope she didn't do it again. It's the path of least resistance. It's the way I've survived for 28 years. But then I remembered the look on Robin's face. I remembered the shame of having to apologize for my own mother's behavior to a woman who was supposed to be a guest. I couldn't go back to that. I couldn't keep living in a world where I had to check my mother's temperature before I could enjoy a beer with my friends. I'm going to send it as a text, I decided. If I send a letter, she'll call me and scream before she finishes reading it. If I send a text, it's there. It's in writing. She can read it, get mad, vent to my dad, and then maybe, hopefully, she'll realize I'm serious. Are you ready for the fallout? My boyfriend asked, coming over to put his hands on my shoulders. No, I admitted, my voice trembling. I don't think I'll ever be ready for her to be disappointed in me. But I think I'm even less ready to keep being disappointed in myself for not standing up to her. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the send button. My heart was thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was the moment. The moment I stopped being the good daughter and started being a whole person. I hit send. The delivered icon appeared almost instantly. I turned the phone face down on the table, my breath hitching in my chest. Now we wait. Now the explosion begins. The phone sat on the wooden table like a live grenade. For 3 minutes, there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own shallow breathing. Then, the first vibration hit. It wasn't a text. It was the rhythmic, persistent buzz of a phone call. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. My mother doesn't do texting when she's been challenged. She needs to hear the tremor in your voice. She needs to feel the impact of her words in real time. I didn't pick up. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard, and I knew that if I answered now, I'd regress. I'd become that 19-year-old girl again, apologizing for things I didn't do, begging for a forgiveness I didn't owe. The call went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the phone buzzed again. Another call. She was rapid-firing, a tactic she used whenever she felt her grip on a situation slipping. When I didn't answer the second time, the texts started. They came in a relentless flood, the ding of each notification sounding like a hammer striking an anvil. How could you say these things to me? After everything I have sacrificed for your health? Robin is not your friend if she is trying to tear this family apart. I haven't slept since the beer garden because I am so worried about your liver, and this is how you treat me? I watched the screen light up over and over. It was exactly as I'd predicted. She wasn't acknowledging the boundary. She was attacking the messenger. She was making Robin the villain and herself the victim. And then came the ultimate weapon, the health card. My blood pressure is skyrocketing because of this stress. If something happens to me, I hope you're happy with your privacy. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the explosive fallout I had feared. It's the classic Middle Eastern guilt trip, the idea that a child's quest for independence is literally killing the parent. It's a weight that's impossible to carry, a psychological shackle that keeps you tethered to their will. Don't read them, my boyfriend said, gently taking the phone and placing it face down in the junk drawer. You told her your piece. You don't have to participate in the aftermath. Let her vent. Let her scream into the void. But the void wasn't just my mother. 5 minutes later, my dad called. My father is the peacekeeper, which is really just a polite way of saying he's the enabler. He spends his life trying to keep my mother's emotional sea calm so he doesn't have to drown in it. When he calls in these moments, it's never to take my side. It's to ask me to just apologize so we can have a quiet Sunday. I answered his call, my voice tight. Hey Dad, Habibti, he started, his voice weary. What did you send to your mother? She is in the living room crying. She says you are choosing your friends over your family. She says you told her she's a source of stress. Why would you say that to her? You know how she is. I said it because it's the truth, Dad, I replied, the tears finally starting to spill over. She went behind my back. She tried to use Robin to manipulate my medical care. Do you realize how dangerous that is? She wants me to stop a medication that my doctor says I need. If I just stop, I could end up back where I was in 2019. Do you want that? Do you want me to be the girl who couldn't get out of bed for 3 months? There was a long silence on the other end. My dad remembers 2019. He was the one who used to bring me glasses of water and leave them on my nightstand because I didn't have the energy to walk to the kitchen. He'd seen the ghost I had become. No, he said softly. Of course I don't want that. But your mother, she doesn't understand these Western medicines. She thinks they are like drugs. She thinks she is protecting you. Her protection is hurting me, Dad. It's making me sick. The stress of her constant judging is worse for my health than any pill could ever be. I need her to stop. I need you to tell her to stop. I can't tell her what to do, he sighed, the defeat evident in his voice. I just want there to be peace. Can't you just call her? Tell her you didn't mean it that way? Tell her you know she loves you, but you want to handle this yourself? No, I said, and for the first time in my life, the word felt solid. I won't apologize for asking for respect. If she wants peace, she can start by respecting my boundaries. I'm not calling her until she can talk to me without attacking my health or my friends. I hung up before he could argue. I felt like I had just run a marathon. My heart was racing, and that familiar, sharp brain zap flickered behind my left eye. A physical manifestation of the adrenaline and the skipped beat of my morning routine. I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, and cried. I cried for the relationship I wished I had with my mother. I cried for the girl who had to hide her medicine in her underwear drawer. I cried for Robin, who was probably sitting at home feeling like she'd destroyed a family just by being a good friend. But as the tears slowed, a new feeling started to take root. It was small, a tiny spark beneath the layers of guilt and fear, but it was there. It was the feeling of standing my ground. For years, I had allowed my mother's worry to be the compass of my life. I had navigated around her moods, her prejudices, and her Google searches like I was sailing through a minefield. And all it had gotten me was a secret life and a constant sense of inadequacy. By sending that text, by refusing to just apologize to my father, I had finally stepped off the treadmill. The afternoon turned into evening. My phone remained in the drawer, though I could hear it buzzing occasionally like a trapped insect. I didn't look. I spent the evening with my boyfriend, watching a mindless movie, trying to pretend that my world wasn't shifting on its axis. Around 9 p.m., a knock came at the door. My heart stopped. We weren't expecting anyone. My apartment building has a buzzer, but sometimes neighbors let people in, or people tail in behind a car in the garage. "Don't," I whispered as my boyfriend stood up. "It's okay," he said, looking through the peephole. He turned back to me, his face grim. "It's your mom." She hadn't just sent texts. She hadn't just sent my dad to do her bidding. She had driven 45 minutes to show up at my door, unannounced, in the middle of a Sunday night. This was the nuclear option. This was her way of saying, "Your boundaries don't exist in my world." I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I had a choice. I could leave the door closed, I could tell her to go away, or I could open it and face the woman who was convinced that my survival was a personal insult to her motherhood. I walked to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the lock. I knew that whatever happened in the next 10 minutes would define the rest of my life. It was time to stop being a case study in her Google searches and start being a woman who owned her own story. I turned the deadbolt. The door swung open. There she stood, looking smaller than I remembered, her face blotchy from crying, holding a Tupperware container of food, her ultimate peace offering and her ultimate weapon. "You're not answering your phone," she said, her voice cracking. "I brought you some okra stew." "You look so thin on those pills, Habibti. Please, let me in." The smell of the okra stew hit me before she even finished her sentence. It's a scent that should be a comfort, rich, tomato-based, earthy with spices. But in that moment, it felt like a trap. In my family, food isn't just sustenance, it's a currency. If you accept the food, you accept the person. If you eat the stew, you're signaling that all is forgiven, that the hierarchy has been restored, and that she is still the caretaker and I am still the child. I looked at her, standing there in the hallway of my apartment building. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed and her hair slightly disheveled. To any outsider, she was a heartbroken mother trying to feed her daughter. But I knew better. I saw the calculation behind the tears. I saw the way she was holding that Tupperware like a shield. "Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, even though my heart was doing a frantic dance in my throat. "It's 9 o'clock on a Sunday. You can't just show up here after everything that was said today." "I am your mother," she repeated, as if those 4 words were a skeleton key that could open any door. "I am not showing up. I am coming to see my daughter who is hurting. You are angry, I know. You are confused. It's the medicine, Habibti. It makes you irritable. It makes you see enemies where there is only love." I felt my jaw tighten. There it was, the immediate gaslighting. My anger wasn't a valid emotional response to a boundary violation. It was a side effect. My desire for privacy was confusion. She was rewriting my reality in real time, right there in the doorway. "I'm not confused, Mom, and I'm not letting you in to talk about my medicine. If you want to come in, we can talk about how we're going to move forward with respect. But the medicine is off limits, permanently." Her face changed then. The soft, sorrowful mask slipped, and the steel underneath showed through. "Off limits? How can it be off limits when it is killing you? I saw your lab results. I saw the numbers. They were red. The doctor's paper had red marks on it. Do you think I can sleep knowing your blood is being poisoned? I went to Robin because she is the only one who has your ear. You won't listen to your own flesh and blood, so I thought maybe you'd listen to a stranger." "Robin isn't a stranger. She's my best friend." I felt my voice rising, the frustration bubbling over. "And you had no right to tell her anything about my health. You embarrassed me. You made her feel like she had to choose sides between me and my own mother. Do you have any idea how much that hurt our friendship?" "If she is a real friend, she would want you to be healthy," my mother shot back, her voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "She would see that you are pale, that you are not the same girl you were. Why are you defending her and attacking me? I am the one who gave you life." Behind me, I heard the soft footfalls of my boyfriend. He didn't come to the door. He knew I needed to do this, but his presence was a grounding wire. He stood in the kitchen, just visible in my peripheral vision, a reminder that I had a home and a life that didn't belong to her. "Mom," I said, lowering my voice, trying to regain control of the situation. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. If you want to have a relationship with me, you have to stop. You have to stop the Google searches. You have to stop the comments about my weight. And you have to stop talking to my friends about my private life. If you don't, I'm going to have to block your number for a while. I can't do this anymore." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh, but her eyes were filling with tears again. "Block my number? Your own mother? You would cast me out because I want you to live? Fine. Keep taking your poisons. Keep letting the doctors tell you that you are depressed when all you need is a good life and a mother's care. But don't come to me when your hair starts falling out. Don't come to me when your liver fails." She thrust the container of okra stew toward me. "Take the food. At least eat something real for once." I looked at the container. I knew that if I took it, she would see it as a victory. She would go home and tell my dad that I was coming around. She would think that her visit had worked. But I also knew that if I refused it, she would stand in that hallway and scream until the neighbors called the police. I took the stew. The plastic was warm against my palms. "Thank you for the food, Mom, but I meant what I said. I need space. Don't call me tomorrow. Don't send Dad to call me. I need time to breathe." "You are breaking my heart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hope your privacy is worth more than your family." She turned and walked down the hallway, her shoulders hunched, the picture of a defeated woman. I watched her until the elevator doors closed, and then I shut my own door and leaned against it, the container of stew feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. I walked into the kitchen and set the Tupperware on the counter. My boyfriend came over and put his arms around me, pulling me into his chest. I didn't cry this time. I just felt empty. "You did it," he whispered into my hair. "You held the line." "I took the food," I said, my voice flat. "I feel like I gave in." "No," he said, pulling back to look me in the eyes. "You took the food to get her to leave peacefully. But you told her the truth. You told her the consequences. That's more than you've ever done before. You're not the same person you were in 2019, and she's starting to realize that. That's why she's fighting so hard. She knows she's losing her hold." I looked at the stew. I could almost hear her voice coming from it, telling me I was thin, telling me I was sick, telling me I was hers. I opened the lid, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud, and for a second, I was tempted to eat it. I was hungry, and it smelled like my childhood. It smelled like the days before the heartbreak, before the depression, before the orange pill bottles. But then I remembered the brain zaps. I remembered the feeling of the darkness closing in. I remembered the way my mother had whispered to Robin at the beer garden, trying to undermine the very thing that kept me standing. I picked up the container, walked over to the trash can, and scraped the okra stew into the bin. It felt like a sacrilege. In my culture, throwing away food is a sin. Throwing away your mother's food is unthinkable. But as the stew hit the plastic liner with a wet thud, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't throwing away the food, I was throwing away the strings. I was refusing the currency. I rinsed the container in the sink, scrubbing away the last traces of the sauce. I would give her the Tupperware back eventually, but it would be empty. And the next time we spoke, it wouldn't be about my pale skin or my abnormal labs. It would be about us. Or it wouldn't be about anything at all. I went to the bathroom and opened my medicine cabinet. I took out the bottle of antidepressants, the small orange bottle that my mother feared so much. I took my dose for the night, the pill sliding down my throat with a sip of water. I wasn't poisoned. I wasn't weak. I was a person who was doing what she needed to do to survive. The rest of the night was quiet. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look for more texts or missed calls. I knew they were there, but they couldn't reach me anymore. I had built a wall, and for the first time, it felt like the wall was made of stone instead of glass. But the real test was still coming. The extended family was about to get involved. I knew my mother wouldn't keep this to herself. She would call her sisters. She would call my aunts in the Middle East. She would weave a story of a daughter who had lost her way, a daughter who was sick and disrespectful. I had to be ready for the phone to ring again. I had to be ready for the entire weight of my heritage to come crashing down on my shoulders. The fallout of a Sunday night confrontation in a Middle Eastern family doesn't stay contained within four walls. It's like an oil spill. It spreads, silent and thick, until it coats everything you've ever known. By Monday morning, I didn't just have a mother problem. I had a village problem. In our community, the anti-network is more efficient than any intelligence agency. I woke up to a screen filled with notifications that felt like a digital firing squad. There were WhatsApp messages from aunts in 3 different time zones. My Aunt Selma, the matriarch of my mother's side of the family, had sent a 3-minute voice note that I didn't even have to play to know the contents of. I could almost see her face, draped in a silk scarf, shaking her head as she told me how my mother's heart was failing because of my coldness. The narrative was already set. I was the Americanized daughter who had turned her back on her roots and her mother's love in favor of a chemical quick fix. I was being painted as the villain in a tragedy I never asked to star in. I sat at my desk at work, trying to focus on spreadsheets, but my mind was a battlefield. Every time my phone buzzed, a jolt of cortisol shot through me. This is what people don't understand about setting boundaries with toxic or overbearing parents. It's not a one-time event. It's a war of attrition. They don't just say, okay, and walk away. They recruit, they manipulate. They use every ounce of cultural leverage they have to make you feel like you're losing your mind. And that's the cruelest part. Because I have struggled with my mind. Because I do have depression. Every time they call me unstable or confused, a little voice in the back of my head wonders if they're right. Am I being hysterical? Is the medication making me more aggressive? I had to stop myself, right there in the office break room, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee. No, I told myself, that is the gaslighting talking. I am not unstable. I am standing up for my right to be healthy. The fact that my health makes them uncomfortable is their burden to carry, not mine. Around lunch, my phone rang. It was my dad again. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be another just apologize call. Hello? I said, stepping into a quiet corner of the parking lot. Habibti, my father said. He sounded older than he had 24 hours ago. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that usually precedes a lecture. I saw the bin this morning. My heart skipped. The bin? The trash, he said. Your mother? She was very upset when she came home last night. But this morning, I was the one who took out the garbage. I saw the stew you threw away. I felt a rush of heat to my face. The ultimate insult had been discovered. Dad, I didn't tell her, he interrupted. His voice was a low murmur. If she knew you threw away her food, she would never speak to you again. But I saw it, and I thought about why you did it. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest. You are trying to tell us you are a grown woman, he continued. You are trying to say that we cannot buy your obedience with a bowl of okra. Am I right? Yes, Dad. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. I love you both, but I can't let Mom run my life anymore. I can't let her treat my medical care like a hobby she can shut down whenever she feels like it. Another long silence. I could hear the wind whistling through the phone. She didn't sleep, my father said finally. She spent the whole night on that computer, searching, looking for reasons. She is terrified, daughter. She thinks if you take these pills, you are no longer the girl she raised. She thinks she has lost you to a bottle. But she's losing me because of her reaction, not the bottle, I argued, my voice cracking. I'm more me now than I've been in years. I'm working, I'm in a healthy relationship, I'm present. When I wasn't on them, I was a ghost. Why can't she see that? Because she doesn't want to see a daughter who needs help from anyone but her, he said. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I will try to talk to her. I will tell her to leave your friends alone. But you must be patient. This is a big mountain for her to climb. I've been patient for 5 years, Dad. I'm out of patience. When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. My father finally understood, or at least he was beginning to. But he was only one half of the equation. My mother was the one who had cornered Robin. She was the one who had turned a sunny afternoon at a beer garden into a psychological thriller. I sent a text to Robin later that afternoon. How are you doing? I'm so sorry you were dragged into this mess. She replied almost instantly. Honestly, I'm still a bit shaken. I've never had a parent talk to me like that. It felt like she was trying to recruit me into a cult or something. But don't you dare apologize. I'm on your side, always. If she reaches out again, I'm just going to tell her that I don't discuss your private business. I've got your back. Reading those words felt like a shield being placed in my hand. I wasn't alone. I had my boyfriend, I had Robin, and I had a father who was, however slowly, starting to see the reality of the situation. But the anti-network wasn't done. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, thinking it might be a client. Hello? Habibti, it is your Aunt Selma. My stomach dropped. Aunt Selma lived in Michigan, but her reach was global. She was the one everyone feared. She was the one who could make you feel guilty for a sin you hadn't even thought of yet. Oh, hi, Auntie, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I hear you are being very difficult, she started, skipping the pleasantries. I hear you are breaking your mother's heart over some Western medicine. Why are you doing this, daughter? We are a family of strong women. We do not need these things. Your mother says you are becoming a stranger. She says you are listening to people who don't know your soul. I took a deep breath. This was it. The final boss of the guilt trip. Aunt Selma, I said, my voice cold and hard. I respect you very much, but this is not your business. My mother should not have called you to complain about my health. It's private. It's between me and my doctor. Private, she scoffed. There is no private in a family. If you are sick, we are all sick. If you are taking things that change your brain, we all suffer. You are being selfish. You are putting your privacy over your mother's peace of mind. Is that what we taught you? If my peace of mind requires me to be depressed and unable to function just so mom feels better, then yes, I am being selfish, I said. And I'm going to keep being selfish until my health is respected. I love you, Auntie, but if you call me again to talk about this, I will have to hang up. There was a gasp on the other end, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. No one talked to Aunt Selma like that. No one. You are truly lost, she whispered, and then the line went dead. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. I felt lighter. The guilt was still there, a dull ache in the background, but the fear was gone. They had used their biggest weapons, the food, the father, the matriarch, and I was still standing. I was still me. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No calls from my mom. No texts from my dad. It was the silent treatment, the final phase of the Middle Eastern parental protest. Usually, this would be the part where I'd break. I'd send a check-in text. I'd buy a small gift. I'd find a way to apologize without actually saying the words, just to end the Cold War. But not this time. On Thursday night, It finally happened. On Thursday night, the silence finally broke. It wasn't a scream, and it wasn't a flood of tears. It was a single text message from my mother. 5 words that carried more weight than the thousands she had sent before. "Can we meet for coffee?" My heart did a strange little flip, half dread, half hope. Usually, my mother doesn't do coffee. She does home. She does dinner. She does environments where she has the home field advantage and can use her hospitality as a weapon. Asking to meet on neutral ground was a concession I hadn't expected. It was a sign that the wall I'd built was actually working. I showed the message to my boyfriend. "What do you think?" I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the Auntie network and the scathing words from Aunt Selma. I kept wondering if I was really lost, as she had put it. But then I looked at my nightstand, at the small orange bottle sitting there. I thought about the girl in 2019 who couldn't even look at her own reflection without crying. That girl didn't have a voice. That girl didn't have boundaries. She was just a vessel for everyone else's expectations. I realized then that my mother wasn't just afraid of the medicine. She was afraid of the person the medicine allowed me to be. She was afraid of a version of me that didn't need her to hold the pieces together. Friday afternoon, I walked into a small, brightly lit cafe on the other side of town. I chose a table near the window, far from the back corners where she could corner me. I saw her walking in 2 minutes later. She looked different. She wasn't wearing her usual warrior mother expression. She looked older, her face etched with a weariness that matched my own. She sat down, clutching her purse in her lap. We didn't hug. We didn't even say hello at first. The air between us was thick with the things we hadn't said over the past week. "I spoke to your doctor," she said abruptly. My blood ran cold. "You what? Mom, I told you." "I didn't call him," she interrupted, raising a hand. "Your father did. He went with me to the office. We didn't have an appointment, but your father, he can be very persistent when he wants to be. He told the receptionist that I was having a crisis and needed to understand. The doctor came out for 5 minutes between patients." I stared at her, stunned. My father, the man who spent his life avoiding conflict, had actually stepped into the line of fire for me. "And?" I whispered. "He told me things," she said, her voice trembling. "He didn't give me your records, but he told me about the chemistry. He told me that for some people, the brain is like a house where the electricity has been cut. He said your medicine isn't a drug, it's the wire that brings the light back. He told me that if you stopped suddenly, the house would go dark again. He said it could be dangerous." She looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the strap of her bag. "I still don't like it," she said, her voice smaller now. "In my head, I still think of it as a poison. I think of my daughter needing a pill to smile, and it hurts my heart. I feel like I failed you, like my love wasn't enough to keep the light on." That was it. That was the core of the whole war. It wasn't about the labs or the Google searches. It was about her own sense of inadequacy. To her, my depression was a grade on her motherhood report card, and the medication was a failing mark. "Mom," I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand, "your love is enough to keep me in this world. But it's not a chemical. It can't fix a serotonin imbalance any more than it can fix a broken leg. Taking this medicine doesn't mean you failed. It means you raised a daughter who is smart enough to listen to science so she can stay here with you." She finally looked up at me, her eyes wet. "I told Aunt Selma to mind her own business," she whispered. "I told her that my daughter is a grown woman and she is making her own way." A laugh bubbled up in my chest, a genuine, relieved sound that I hadn't made in days. "You told Selma to mind her own business? I'd have paid money to see that." We sat there for an hour, talking about things that had nothing to do with medicine. We talked about work, about my boyfriend, about the flowers she wanted to plant in her garden. The boundary was still there. I could feel it, like an invisible fence between us. But for the first time, she wasn't trying to tear it down. She was just standing on the other side of it, learning how to talk to me again. As we stood up to leave, she paused. "Robin," she said. "The girl from the beer garden." "Yeah?" Tell her I am sorry I made her uncomfortable. I was desperate. I was a mother who thought her child was drowning. I didn't mean to be a bad person." "I'll tell her, Mom. She'll appreciate that." I walked out of that cafe feeling like I had finally taken a full breath of air for the first time since 2019. The war wasn't completely over. There would be other comments, other worries, and other Google searches. That's just who she is. But the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer a victim of her anxiety. I was the architect of my own life. Looking back, that day at the beer garden was the worst day of my year. But it might have been the best thing that ever happened to my relationship with my family. It forced the secret into the light. It forced the confrontation that we had been dancing around for half a decade. And it forced me to realize that I am stronger than the guilt I was raised with. To anyone out there who is dealing with parents who don't understand your mental health journey, hold the line. It's going to be messy. There might be explosions. There might be thrown away okra stew and calls from angry aunts. But your peace of mind is worth the fallout. You are the only one who has to live inside your head. Make sure it's a place you actually want to be. What would you have done if your parent tried to turn your best friend against your medical choices? Have you ever had to set a nuclear boundary with your family to protect your mental health? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Sometimes, knowing we aren't the only ones fighting these culture wars makes the burden a little easier to carry. I'm still on my medication. I'm still pale sometimes. I still have abnormal labs once in a while. But for the first time in a long time, the lights in my house are on, and I'm the one with my hand on the switch.